There's two BMW engines that are debatably the best of all time. The new and improved snarling S58 and the tried and true powerhouse B58. In today's video, we'll dive into what makes these two engines so special and pick which of these engines gets to wear the crown of being truly the best BMW engine ever. The B58 engine needs no introduction. Being released in 2015, it was immediately equipped in many different BMW models from the 2, 3, 4, 5 series, even the new Supra that debuted. This engine was an inline-six that was equipped with a twin-scroll turbocharger, and straight off the factory production line, it was good for up to 382 horsepower and 369 foot-pounds of torque, meaning that anybody could purchase this engine and immediately be thrown back in their seats straight off the factory lot. This engine was immediately acclaimed at being BMW's peak collaboration of power and reliability. This would later lead to the B58 winning the 2020 award for Ward's Top 10 Engines of the Year. And although BMW's won award after award for their amazing inline-six engines, the B58 specialty was different. It laid in the fact that the B58 was a modular engine. And so what this means is that 80% of the parts on the B58 are cross-compatible with the inline-4 version, which is the B48 engine. So this actually allows BMW to mass produce parts, meaning that the driver actually had easier access to replacement parts at a lower price point. As well, the modular design enables each cylinder in the engine to create the same amount of power as the next, meaning that the engine puts down power smooth and efficiently while never going out of balance. This engine came from the factory with a forged crank and rods and had a crank girdle equipped to the engine that reinforced the entire block by preventing the crankshaft from bending and allows the engine to withstand high torque figures. And so essentially BMW owners are getting an engine that can withstand high horsepower figures, creates massive low-end torque, all off the factory lot without spending $1 yet. And so overall, it's easy to see why the B58 engine is so popular among tuners and enthusiasts. And let's not forget about the glorious exhaust note from this engine. But one of the things that makes this engine so amazing to this day is that it's tried and true. Since this engine released in 2015, it makes it almost a decade old to this point, meaning that drivers have accumulated upwards of 100,000 miles. And to this point, it's been very stout and reliable. The trouble points on this engine are really few and far between. Some of the factory issues which you can expect are fuel injector issues, which is known among really all of BMW's engines from the N54 onward, and besides that, come down to the PCV, and this part can be replaced in 10 to 20 minutes and really just creates a plume of white smoke from the engine and exhaust, which can easily be noticed, and then you know it needs to be replaced. But most of the other cases of the B58 engine having issues or blowing or etc. pertain to people trying to tune it up from 6, 7, 800 horsepower and maxing it out beyond its limits. So if you look throughout the internet, you'll find rare cases of people's pistons blowing or throwing a rod or issues along those lines, but for the most part, for daily drivers and tuners who just want an OEM plus powertrain that sits at 4 to 500 horsepower, this is not going to be an issue long term. Most people who own this engine have not had issues to date and praise it as being the best engine that they've owned. To have forged rods, a crank girdle equipped, push up to 382 horsepower stock, again, an underrated number, and be extremely open to tunability, all that paired in with the fact it's been out for a decade, so most of the issues have come to fruition by now, it comes down to be debatably the best BMW engine ever that ties together power and reliability seamlessly. But now that we've gone over the B58 engine, it's time for us to go on to the new and improved new kid on the block, the S58. The S58 engine released in 2019 and debuted in the new G Series M models, so the G80 M3, the G82 M4, and so forth. And this engine is BMW's absolute peak of power. It is a twin turbocharged inline-six engine that pushes 473 horsepower and 442 foot-pounds of torque on the standard models. The competitions get a monstrous 503 horsepower and 479 foot-pounds of torque stock from the factory. And the power of the S58 lies in the smaller details that often get overlooked. Starting off, the S58 is a twin turbocharged engine instead of a single twin scroll turbocharger. But what makes these twin turbochargers different is that they're mono scroll turbos, so they are not twin scrolling, meaning that each turbocharger only has one channel for exhaust flow, which is basically your typical design on most turbochargers that aren't from BMW. And while this makes the engine heavier and technically less efficient than a twin scroll turbocharger, it gives the vehicle more power because there's two of them. On top of this, the S58's compression ratio is redesigned from an 11:1 ratio to a 9.3:1 ratio, and pairing that with the shorter stroke than the B58 engine is able to handle more power. And so the S58 engine is an aluminum closed deck with an aluminum head that's 3D printed. And you might be wondering why 3D printed, and that's because it actually enhances the precision throughout the engine, enabling it to channel exhaust gases more effectively. On top of that, you're getting a forged crank, forged pistons, and a forged rod, all from the factory, also allowing this engine to handle higher horsepower figures without rebuilding it from the bottom up. And now on paper, the S58 might sound extremely similar to the B58 engine, minus the fact that it has an additional turbocharger, but they're actually completely different from the ground up. The S58 engine built off all the amazing aspects of the B58 and made them even better. 80% of all S58 parts are completely and independently designed separate from the S55 and B58 engines. And so what this means is BMW's engineers sat down and actually created essentially a completely different engine from anything they've ever built previously. And this really shows in BMW's hyper focus to the cooling system of this engine. And so looking deeper into the cooling system of the S58, early signs point to great reliability on this engine. BMW equipped this engine with 3 radiators, an additional cooler, and the transmission is supported by a dedicated oil cooling system. And so what this means overall across the board is that transmission temperatures are not going to be dictated and predicated on the rest of the cooling system. You're going to get stable, cool temperatures to the transmission, enabling steady power at all times. As well, the 3 radiators, intercoolers, and heat exchangers on the engine are going to keep oil temperatures low, enabling peak lubrication throughout the engine so we don't have metal-to-metal contact through the internals. And so right off the bat, the cooling system inside of the S58 engine already points that it's going to be very reliable long term. And for those of you who've ever owned a BMW from the E46 onwards know that the cooling system is typically a trouble area on BMWs, but it seems like that's been sorted out with the S58. For anybody who knows anything about performance, cooler engines always means more power because you're getting less heat soak throughout the engine and more efficiency. And so although you're getting a twin turbocharging setup with 2 mono scroll turbos, you're able to balance out and stabilize fuel efficiency with power. And on top of the cooling system being redesigned, BMW took special care to revamp the entire fuel system to enhance fuel delivery. And so overall, when comparing the S58 to the B58 or the S55 engine of the previous gen, you're getting the best attributes of the silky smooth inline-six, twin turbochargers, a completely revamped and upgraded cooling system, and improved fuel delivery system, all with a shorter stroke and higher revs. And so you're essentially getting the absolute peak that BMW has to offer in the power department, making this engine the absolute best in terms of power and performance. And so overall, when you pair together the twin turbocharging setup, the shorter stroke, the enhanced cooling system, the enhanced fuel system, and the redesigned compression ratio, you're getting the absolute peak of BMW's performance and power. BMW genuinely outdid themselves. But although power and performance are the craze behind buying these new BMWs, something that most people want on the backside of that is reliability. And starting off from its core, the S58 is still a true-bred BMW engine, still being that 3.0 liter displacement inline-six that we've grown to love for its smoothness and linear power output. But although power's next to none with this engine, you do have to factor in that it is a twin turbocharging setup. So right off the bat, you're adding one more trouble point to this engine, and it's in the fact that you have 2 turbochargers now instead of 1. And while this reliability concern can be negated when you factor in BMW's improvements in the cooling system, it still does introduce one more trouble point regardless. And being such a new engine and the fact that it just debuted in 2019, we still haven't seen long term how the S58 engine's going to hold up. Something that is a massive improvement in the S58 engine over the previous S55 though is the fact that the crank hub is one piece now, as to where the S55 had it in two pieces. And so anybody who understands vehicles or physics at all understands that a one-piece crank hub immediately eliminates all concerns of the crank slipping under high torque or high horsepower figures. On the S55, since it was a two-part system, this was something that was a major concern. Anybody tuning up to 500, 600 horsepower on the S55 would run the risk of the crank slipping and essentially the engine having a major costly repair right off the bat. So the one-piece crank hub is an automatic green light for reliability on the S58. That being said, with the B58, this is typically not a concern either because the B58's crank hub was redesigned as well. But just comparing it to the S55, this is something that should be mentioned that is a green light for really both of these engines that we're reviewing today. And so overall, pointing to the fact that you're getting a one-piece redesigned crank hub, you're getting a dedicated transmission fluid, cooling system, 3 radiators and intercoolers across the front of the vehicle, this engine seems like it's going to hold its own long-term reliability wise. The main thing to take note of is again that you have 2 turbochargers instead of 1, and so that automatically creates a reliability concern over the B58's 1 turbocharger. But now it's time for us to pick which of these engines should you take home and which one is better. And now if we're tying in wickets such as cost and reliability, access to parts and etc., I would say overall, the B58 has just been around so much longer and is essentially tried, true, and reliable. And for that reason, the average driver would be happier at the lower price point of the B58 engine. And now that being said, if we're picking the best engine of the both, if we compare the S58 side by side with the B58, the overall best engine will definitely be the S58 engine, pushing 500 horsepower on a stock engine, and the fact that BMW's engineers solely redesigned 80% of these components specific to the S58, you can't really get much better than that. The S58 is going to take the crown of now being called the best, in terms of performance at least, the best BMW engine ever. So in all honesty, it can come down to be subjective. Are you buying a car secondhand and you want reliable and power and a car that you can tune up and do your own upgrades to and kind of work on, you know, sort of DIY? Well, the B58's probably for you. Are you buying a brand new G80 M3 competition and you want the absolute cream of the crop? Well then look no further, the S58 has no competition when it comes to it. But let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your comments down below. Do you own a B58? Do you own a S58? Are you tied between the both of them? Do you not know what you want to get? Well, let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your experiences. And do not forget, hit that subscribe button to stay in the loop on more helpful videos like this one. And I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace out.